All right, what is going on, everyone? This is going to be a new thing I'm trying where I'm going to each month dissect the top monthly opportunities in very high detail, much like I did with that MULN video. So this is the video for July 2023, and these are just how I view kind of the easiest layup ops. I know a lot of people are trading different tickers, different strategies. This is just simply my own views on these. Everybody has their own strengths, but hopefully this opens up your mind to what I view the broken slot machines of each month and points you in the direction to at least do some open analysis and potentially expand your own playbook. So the first opportunity I highlighted in my tweet was MULN. So that ticker I've already dissected in extremely high detail. I think I did a whole half-hour video just for that one name. I have it linked on Twitter. You can find it on my private YouTube channel. I am not going to touch that anymore than I did, just because I don't really have much else to say. So we're going to skip that for now and jump into CRBU. And there were a couple ops in this, but I think the just most obvious, of course, would be on July 6th. And this would be pre-market at 8 a.m. There was a headline that Pfizer was taking, I believe, like a $25 million stake in the company. And so guess what? CRBU, I'm guessing you haven't heard of Caribou Biosciences. Neither have I. I still don't even know what they do. It doesn't matter. But what I have heard of is Pfizer. I think everybody's heard of Pfizer. Pfizer is a mega pharma. And for them to take a $25 million stake in Caribou Biosciences, that is a huge statement of confidence. We're not trying to be analysts. We're just trying to make the smartest decision we can, the most precise, accurate decision in the quickest amount of time. If you tell me, hey, guess what? $500 million biotech gets a 5% investment from Pfizer. Guess what? I'm buying that stock. And so the first opportunity is, of course, just getting long on the headline. That is the benefit of being at your desk and prepared early. Yeah, I don't know how far I necessarily would have held this. This does trend pretty nicely, and there's no meaningful pullback. So, my prior bar stops would have worked really well. Just because we're consolidating here, I'm probably not even getting out right here. Like, there's no real pullbacks. Maybe the first place where you end up getting out is probably on that big down bar. So maybe you get out in the 550 area. And what's also meaningful is we make a really big move from 360 to 560, but then we don't really pull back whatsoever, right? So I'm really thinking in the range of, right, we went from kind of like 4-ish to 560. I think I misspoke just there. But then we barely pull back, right? We only are able to pull back 30, 40 cents. And as a percentage of the overall move, that's really small. So I'd consider this holding up exceptionally well. And as a result, this makes me interested should we break above these pre-market highs. The open does arrive, and that is exactly what we do. So I'd be reestablishing a long there, probably using lows of prior bar. And I'd again just be using my same basic stop. Not that it's perfect or magic. It's just a simple heuristic I use for things that are trending. And that would be using the lows of the prior bars. So that actually works pretty darn well. And I probably get stopped out around 640. And that's going to be great for me. That is a solid win. So I think those two plays are kind of the most obvious thing. Like, as far as finding the broken slot machine, how many stocks are going to be trading up this much that day? Not that many. And the other thing is you've got fresh news. It's huge news. We're doing massive volume versus normal. So all of these make it an appealing ticker to trade. And that's why it would be on my watch list, just simply due to, ideally I'm even seeing that 8 a.m. headline and buying that breaking news, but it's both that long on the breaking news as well as really nice strong consolidation into the open. You get the huge inflow of volume, and it sets up for like a really nice trend. I know some people were considering shorting the stock. This, to me, it's just not a short anywhere. Like, we are just always holding up well. Potentially there's this range break here, but I just don't know how much this thing's going to pull back when it's just sitting so nicely. I don't have that much interest. Like, if you were to ask me what the two plays were, the best by far is buying that breaking news headline. Like, there's just no way this thing doesn't go up. And then potentially that continuation play. Part of the reason why is, like, I'm always thinking I want to go long with any news catalysts, right? When there's no news and there's big moves, I want to think mean reversion. When there is news, I want to be with the trend. I want to be with that catalyst. I want to be with that volume. I do not want to be fighting that. So this is kind of just a basic breaking news thing and a basic continuation pattern. Nothing all that crazy. The rest of the stuff midday here, I kind of just consider this no man's land, which is a video I'm going to be releasing soon. Even this break to highs here, it really doesn't, it's not enough consolidation given the size of this move. Like what I'd really want to see is if this move was, you know, kind of from 550-ish up to 680-ish, I almost want a parallel amount over. So for me to buy this break, it would probably need to happen at around like noon or later. So really, this just isn't enough for me to rebuy in there. And so that kind of is just it for me on this ticker. Again, I don't think that this is some epic home run or anything. I just view it as an easy layup on that news. The other ticker I'm going to jump to is good old Novartis, and this was on July 7th. If I can just quickly jump to that. And so this was where they lost, I believe it was their Entresto patent. And so this was kind of a big deal. So a lot of these pharma companies have a lot of revenues from certain drugs, a lot of expectations of revenues. And so if your patents are marked invalid, then you lose your competitive moat for that drug. Depending on the drug, that can be a really big deal. So if you're a really astute, prepared trader, what you're going to do is you're going to be paying enough attention to analyst research reports, CNBC, news articles, Bloomberg, and figure out like what are the drugs that contribute a lot of revenue to each biotech. So I'd always be taking notes in my software. Okay, these are the main drugs for these companies, and then I'd always try to be aware of these patent cases. So when they lost this, ideally, I want to be on top of that headline as quick as possible. A lot of these are kind of patent decisions or court decisions, which can be harder to find the original source. But really, this doesn't move all that quick on the headline initially, and then it does really start to roll. If I can't be early, just the way that this pattern unfolds, like this 1108 bar, if I'm not involved, and I do think this is a big deal, and certainly the volume is pretty darn impressive for this stock, I might consider shorting that break of prior bar lows there and just giving it, you know, ideally I'd give it to those highs, but if I don't think that's worth it, I might be a little bit tighter. And then once it starts to trend, I'm giving it prior bar highs in this case. So maybe I end up getting stopped there. If we do start to really capitulate, my rule is I'll do the prior bar trailing stop unless we really get capitulatory. I would say this is starting to get pretty darn capitulatory, especially for a large stock like Novartis. So maybe I start to take a little bit off earlier. I don't really have too much interest in the long here. The volume doesn't really mega capitulate. I'm a little bit scared of kind of, you know, patent news and the volume this is doing. It's more steady. If this really went, I'd start to consider long, but this in this specific way it unfolded, really not quite capitulatory enough for me to think long. So yeah, I would just say kind of a textbook breaking news. I'm not really interested in shorting in what I consider no man's land here. For me to want to re-short this after such a massive move for the stock, I really would need us to consolidate and re-break 94. So nothing so crazy here, kind of just another textbook breaking news. So then we're going to go to PWM. This was kind of one of those silly little semi-sketchy IPOs, and we're going to analyze this from July 6th until the 8th. So all these IPOs, I mean, it never used to be the case like this, but we really need to keep a close eye on these because some of these always end up doing crazy moves. What we see is that first day, we have resistance at $6 for the highs, kind of a tight range, not that interesting. But then I always try to have price alerts in. I definitely want an alert to know when this gets up to 590. Sure enough, this happens after hours, and boom, we break $6 and it really starts to explode. Once it starts exploding, wow, you need to be careful with this thing. And I'm really, especially if we're consolidating this flat, I'm mostly thinking continuation. Obviously later on we do a massive move. But overall, I'm really careful of shorting these things. I don't necessarily want to be a hero. We've seen some crazy IPOs go nuts between HKD and what was it, AXTG or something like that. And so I don't need to be a hero shorting this stuff. I mostly want to try and be open-minded to the long and the continuation. So it goes nuts after hours. The next day, we kind of start to trade down, but you know, some of these can be so tough. I'm not sure I'm so interested in those shorts. I'm probably still thinking long if we break above the range, which we did at around, I don't know, was it $13 or so? Kind of those pre-market highs and everything. But there's nothing so much this next day I love. But what I did think was interesting was, might even go one more day forward, is after hours. Let me get another day here. Okay, there we go. Got that extra day. That was a struggle. So one thing I want to point out that's interesting is after hours, we end up doing this spike down when I think it was like a 424B whatever gets filed. So keep in mind, guys, that is not an offering. You cannot do an offering like literally days after you IPO. That was simply just the same filing for the initial one. That was not something new. So one thing that's interesting is a lot of people were hitting and shorting on that. That is, I mean, it's somewhat of a chump play just because it doesn't make any sense. Like that's just the normal filing. So what I think is interesting, if once that goes down to like 15 or so, 16 or so, that's kind of an interesting buy because so many people are shorting it on just something that's total nonsense and likely to be needing to cover. That next day, you know, you always want to keep an eye on this just because we end up with like an amazing breakout out of that range again. Rest of this stuff is kind of chop. And again, I want to be super careful shorting that stuff. No short here really interests me. So now I'm going to jump to ATVI, and this is going to be on July 11th. So this is super, super interesting. So ATVI is in a pending merger or acquisition by Microsoft. It's been trading at a very, very large discount due to antitrust concerns and everything. It's generally looked like this wouldn't go through. And so then what happens is at close to 11 a.m., there is a court decision where this starts to get overruled, where it can actually, the approval can, you know, get closer to going through. And so we see some huge volume and the spikes up. So yeah, finding the source of that decision, I think this one was kind of hard. So yeah, buying this is a little bit tougher, but what I would say is buying some of those other video game makers in sympathy is an interesting trade. But what I really, really, really want to highlight and consider the best op is this $87 level. So we make a big move from 82 to 87, we pull back, then we start to hold up and really tighten. And what's so interesting is the volume in here, we get like a secondary headline about another approval agency. And like, look, I'm not trying to be an analyst. Like, as you'll see with this, the Caribou news, the Novartis news, you don't hear me running any Excel model on anything of, oh, what's the fair value of this? It's so much to me, just much more binary. Is there news? If so, I want to go with. And so what's so interesting with this Activision is we have this amazing $87 level. The volume has been pretty nice overall, especially considering what it was doing before. Then we break that key level in conjunction with another headline and massive, massive, massive volume inflow. So this really is the money shot. That 87 there is just so, so key. And look, like, let's say, you know, I got the question, what happens, Lance, if the news isn't as good as you thought, or what if the news is actually bad? Well, guess what? That's why we're day traders. If that starts to go down, I can get out of that thing, right? And, you know, the reality is like, that's going up for a reason. Someone understands that headline and knows this is the next incremental big one. So, the beauty of this 87 break there is you have a wonderful technical pattern, right? Big move, holding up really, really well, extra tight consolidation, then boom, breaking news in conjunction with volume inflow, technical pattern, super, super awesome setup. That 87 is the magic moment for me. So let's see. Next, we have the Coinbase headline, the Bitcoin headline. That was on 7-13. Okay, boy, oh boy, was that a huge one. Woo. Okay, so what ends up happening is another, I believe this was also a court decision, and that was regarding that Ripple did not violate securities laws. This has huge implications in the great debate between the SEC and Coinbase and crypto in general as an industry. So this is a huge, huge headline due to the precedence it makes for the whole rest of the industry. And then, sure enough, Coinbase explodes to highs. So what I really stressed in some of the SMB work is it is so important to have your key basket for these Bitcoin headlines. We saw so many of them in June. You cannot afford to be caught offsides on what tickers you need to go to on these headlines, right? We've got an exchange traded Bitcoin product like BITO, but then we've got some of the OTC stuff and everything. Like, it's like you need to weigh the difference between going for OTC, going for something like Coin, going for something like MSTR, Riot, Mara. What is going to offer the largest move and the liquidity that you might need for your level of trading? Super, super important. If you're someone that tends to have the headlines, you can go much higher up on the food chain. If you tend to be a newer, younger, less experienced trader, you might want to go for the tickers that move slower and don't require you to, you don't necessarily need liquidity if you're trading smaller size early on. So it's so important to have game planned that. Headline comes out and the volume is huge. This is one of those things where it's like, yeah, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I really want to just find the stuff that's really holding up. So like, okay, I buy coin, maybe you get stopped out here at 88 on those prior bar lows potentially, and maybe I miss some of this. That's fine. But what I really want to look for is how's this consolidation? And we end up holding exceptionally well, right? And so it's like, I think it's probably fine to go for some of these breaks. And if you get stopped out there, fine. Because eventually on something doing this much volume, this has a huge RVol on that break of 96 and boom, we're kind of off to the races. One other thing, and I mean, even this break later, like again, because this has a news catalyst, I'm largely thinking I want to go with this trend. Huge volume, it's holding up. I'm not thinking short this anywhere. I don't care how big the move is. Like, look at the slope of this move. It is less than 1. It is in no form capitulatory. Very, very steady, very high volume. The whole sector is ripping. And this is a shorted name. This is much contested due to the SEC lawsuits. So I am only thinking long on this thing. Nowhere does it really get euphoric. And even later on, like the market closes, and so I'm probably not so interested, but this never pulled back. That is a beautiful, strong setup. So then I want to jump to Nikola, and this is going to be on the 13th and 14th. So let's see. Let's even go to the 15th. Okay. So what happens, and I think this was on the 13th, is they end up getting a headline that they're selling 50 EV vehicles to Boyotech or something like that, if I recall. And so again, I don't really care so much what the headline is. I'm viewing most things as just fairly binary and listening to the chart. And so I think what's interesting is if I go to this daily chart though, what I really need to point out is we had some, a nice move from 50 cents. The highs are around 180. And then we've had a pretty decent consolidation, all things considered. And so that's what I'm looking at on this 713 day. And that 180 is going to be a super important level to me. So now let me try to jump back to this, which they never make it easy. 713. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, and so sure enough, the ticker is strong, consolidating, everything else. We do end up breaking 180 here, but this actually doesn't really interest me that much just because of the way we got there, right? We've already trended, like if I had to buy anywhere, I want to find this setup early and buy this right here, right? Amazing RVol. It's a really, really tight consolidation. We've consolidated all the way to the moving average. So if you were to ask me, what does a good breakout look like? It's this here. What I don't want to buy is this 180 break later, because we've already been going from 150 in a pretty straight, steady line. Like, no, I don't want to be short, but I just don't love my odds of a clean move the way that's trending. That being said, once we break 180, I got to think that, oh man, like if this does set up, this could really go off to the races. You know, so I would be watching it around 195. Like this is probably like the next best entry late there. So all this to me in here, this is again the concept of no man's land to me. The only place I'm going to touch this long, again, due to that no man's land concept, is out over here around 115. I mean, it's okay. This is an okay setup. We end up going pretty nicely, and we end up closing right at highs. So truth be told, as far as the intraday, I don't love so much any of that, but what I really do love is how strong this closes. We are closing top tick on massive, massive volume. You know, if I were to jump back to that daily chart, you saw just how huge that volume was versus all the other days, right? And so just the week earlier, we had that MULN that I dissected. They do EVs. They had the strong close high volume breakout. So as a result, that makes me, the success of that overnight makes me super interested in overnighting this. And after hours, we hold up so strong. If you're still at your computer, this break, that 225 break of that intraday high, like, I mean, especially if you're young and hungry, like having an alert in and being still aware for that break, like once that breaks 225, the odds that this just has some amazing overnight gap is probably really good. Sure enough, that is exactly what happens. And we gap up a ton. And so I'm going to touch one thing that's probably the most common question I got. And that question was, oh, but Lance, aren't you afraid of offerings, like, you know, and shelves and this thing having shares? And so anytime someone has asked me that, I've said to them, oh yeah, that's a totally valid fear. How often, what is the probability of a stock doing an offering on a day one breakout? I ask them that, and they have no answer for me, but they say, oh, but, you know, I've seen that happen before. And I say to them, I've seen, you know, car accidents before. Does that mean I don't get in a car? Of course not, right? That would be ludicrous, because in the aggregate, me getting in a car is much, much more beneficial than my risk of getting in a car accident, right? So it's not a question of could this have an offering on day one? Of course it could. But my question for these traders that ask me that is, in the aggregate, right? The aggregate, what happens overall on these really strong breakout patterns in day one? That's much different from days later, right? And that's where like nuances matter, and most traders are not nuanced enough. You know, most people think, oh, you know, the probability of an offering is uniform. That is dead wrong, right? You know, most people know they got to give the stock a chance to run before that offering. So no, I'm really not that afraid of a day one offering when these are in play and working otherwise. And it's like, you know, the reward on some of these is just so asymmetric anyways, particularly in the MULN. And so sure enough, I think the most important thing is right off the open, this does the exact same pattern as MULN. Go back to the other video I did. It dumps off the open, we break to highs, we fail hard, and this is literally almost bar by bar the exact same intraday. All the traders out there that saw my MULN video, they had this in their heads. That can create an amazing, amazing short opportunity against those highs again. And sure enough, it did the same exact unwind. This is as easy as it gets. The easiest opportunity of the month had to have been Nikola, just because this was so similar to the MULN a few days earlier. Where would I have covered this? Probably approaching those 210s, just because we're getting so overextended. That's really eaten into the prior day's range. I don't necessarily need to catch the bottom here. Even catching into the teens, that's good enough for me. If you're an options trader, one other fun thing you can do is like the vol is just so high on days like this. And when that fails, that's an amazing opportunity to just sell vol and get like some really nice compression there. So yeah, this was kind of probably my favorite opportunity of the month. Just because it's so similar to the MULN, I don't feel the need to crazy dissect this one. You know, it just did huge volume. It's just watch the MULN video and just view this as like a perfect analog. What I will say is I think the long overnight on Nikola was less appealing, just because Nikola had kind of a much bigger range the prior day. It feels maybe a little chasey. Nikola has ran much further overall. I think, so the volume wasn't as insane on Nikola. So I think the long was probably a little bit weaker, but I think the short in Nikola was even better just because the stock has ran so far off the lows and had been such a big move from that initial headline. So yeah, I actually like the short better than the MULN. Next, I'm going to jump to the Microsoft. Man, in actual home runs, this might have been maybe the biggest opportunity of the month. This was on 7/18. And essentially what happens, right? This whole market is being driven by the AI theme. Microsoft is one of those players, and Microsoft comes out with details and pricing for their AI. And again, I'm not some analyst. I'm not going to tell you what the expectations were. I'm not going to tell you what it does for the bottom line. What I will tell you is, boom, headline comes out. You know this is a market theme. If you see that headline, you just want to be buying as much of this as you can. And from a pure technical basis, if you don't have the headline and quick enough, once you know it's binary news, like, okay, I'm thinking long, how can I go with this? Huge volume on this, incredible volume. We're breaking to intraday highs. And sure enough, we hold that prior bar lows for the whole move to 356. That is an incredible opportunity. On a volume basis, we are doing 600,000 shares per bar, right? So the dollar opportunity of this, like to even get 10,000 shares is nothing when it's doing that much per bar. And to make 10 points is just, that's an incredible opportunity. If I had to guess the easiest six-figure trade of the month, this is probably up there with AMC Ape, which I'll go over later, because this volume is staying so high, and I think that's something that people aren't nuanced enough to, is this volume is barely going down, right? Even on some of these bars, like generally the highest volume on news will be the first bar or two. This is running steady the whole time. We start to go down as we break out, volume back in. So even though this is a shorter consolidation than I'd normally want, I'd probably want closer to that moving average. It's doing so much volume here that I think you go for it. Same typical stop. And yeah, maybe I'd probably get stopped out around here. So be it. It's okay that I don't catch the whole thing. On some of these catalysts that are doing so much volume and so steady like that, this is another interesting area to use options. I know a lot of people do a lot of success with that just because the vol just explodes so much, especially on these things with weeklies. So that's Microsoft. And so one theme I would say was the basis of this whole month is preparation, because so often this month you would get a huge opportunity. Then shortly thereafter, you would get an equally amazing opportunity that was super analogous to that. So the same way we had Nikola right after MULN, I think literally a day later, we get this Apple headline about their AI. Apple is kind of less so in the AI space, yada, 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 but insane volume. And again, just using that basic prior bar lows, you end up catching an amazing move in Apple, insanely liquid. We are doing millions of shares per bar. So to be able to catch that headline and make a couple points in Apple on size is incredible. If this doesn't go anywhere, it's so liquid that you can get out. So this is, again, not as good as Microsoft, but what makes this easier is, I guess, like you should have just learned from Microsoft, right? You should have been game planning what other stocks can get these headlines, what other stocks can have stuff like this. So yeah, I'm not going to mega dissect this. I think that's just simply being aware and game planning is the key part. Having that sense of urgency where when you see an opportunity, you don't wait a week to master it. I want to be hiring or working with the traders that are so hungry that they will not leave the office until they've mastered all the material presented to them that day. Who are the traders that will not allow themselves to log off until they're prepared for the next day, just in case that Apple headline comes? That is what I want. So now the AMC Ape, man, people were hating on this month, but like there's been no other month with this many opportunities. I'm getting tired of talking at this point. 7-21, I think this was after hours, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, yep. So everybody should hopefully know the AMC Ape court case. We were waiting on a decision for whether the share class would be able to be converted and collapsed. So this is also an important concept called the pendulum, and knowing what the market feels is offsides or not. Everybody on the street was betting that the judge rules in favor of collapsing those shares. The decision comes out Friday after hours. If you're still on your desk on a summer Friday, congrats for the easiest opportunity of the month. Headline comes out, AMC starts to go up, Ape starts to go down, and it's just, this ticker is so liquid. And what happened was the judge caught everybody off sides. They rejected the proposal, said there would need to be changes and with all these issues the judge had. And look at this. In the same thing, just a huge, beautiful trend, right? This stock goes up 100%. 100% on millions of shares per bar. We are doing almost 2 million shares per bar, and it goes up almost 100%, guys. That is a ridiculous opportunity, and the 2-minute trailing stop ends up keeping you in the whole time, guys. So like, yeah, were there some traps this month? Sure. Could you have been positioned wrong into this trade? Sure. Like, did people have losses? Yeah, I get it. But like, to argue that the opportunities this month were not insane, it just egregious to me, right? Like, it is not unfathomable to get a couple 100,000 shares on this headline and make a killer 6-figure trade. Like, these trades that I'm going over, some trading is hard, these aren't. Nikola isn't hard, Microsoft isn't hard, Apple isn't hard, this AMC Ape isn't hard. And Ape, I'm not gonna pull up the chart, but that of course moved inverse and absolutely melted down to like 60-70 cents. Huge opportunities. It does not get much easier for this, guys. Same deal. It's got a catalyst. I don't need to read the 77 pages. I don't care about the 77 pages. I'm not smart enough. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know any of this stuff. All I know is there's a huge positive catalyst. This is the type of thing that all the shorts are screwed. Now, as far as selling early, because this came up in my talks too, there is no reason to sell early, right? Just because something is going in your favor, that is not a reason to sell. Just because you're up money, that is not a reason to sell. This is trending, and there's so many people that are stuck short. And again, it's a Friday after hours, right? How many people aren't even at their desk? How many hedge fund managers are in the car on the way to the Hamptons or in the chopper on the way to the Hamptons? They are not getting this headline as fast as a day trader. So when you get prints on this, you better lock that seatbelt in, and you better make this for all it's worth, because this is just a once a month, once a quarter level opportunity. Again, not so interested in the short for the same reasons I'm not interested in shorting all those other catalysts. We don't capitulate. I want to figure out how to go with the trend. Just too steady to be thinking short. All I'm thinking is, wow, this is the money shot right there. Okay, now we're going to jump to Siri. All right. So something I want to point out with this Siri is like the most boring stock in the world. This is a 15-year chart. Let's look at the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, we've held a range of, $2.50 to $7. And if we were to look at the last couple years, the last 5 years, this stock does not move. I cannot stress enough. This is the most boring stock ever, right? The daily ranges are 10 cents. Super hyper liquid, super high market cap. And so what happens is we end up squeezing. High short interest, this gets taken to town. We go from $5 all the way to $8. That is a massive move on a huge market cap. But unlike most tickers, this has an incredible float, probably one of the bigger floats in the market. So no real news, no real catalyst, just short covering and squeezing. We go from 450 to 8. So let's dissect that a little bit. So 7-20 is the day to play. And so what we're going to find is like, I would say that on 7-20, this actually wasn't that opportunistic. Like this didn't really capitulate anywhere and it was pretty steady. So I'm not so much interested in this day except for damage control. Okay, so here's the day we start to really explode. You know, I have no interest in getting long this stock. It's already overextended on the daily. It's a super boring stock. Like I think most of the longs are probably just chump plays. But as far as the short, a lot of this is still pretty steady. If there's any place where I might end up shorting, you know, it would need to be on a turn of one of these bars. But like, yeah, it's just not my favorite thing anywhere in here. Yes, it's boring. But man, like it just never, you know, if we just use the Bollinger Band as the base here, we never really went. It was super choppy. I don't want to be fighting this choppiness everywhere. So no major interest. I think if you really just focus on damage control, that's the name of the game. So yeah, it's, you know, I see how you can fall for this just because it's so boring and stable. But then I think you really need to just protect yourself because it just nowhere super cleanly capitulated. So I think most people, you probably lose some money in this and you think, oh man, this was so tough, which, you know, this ticker was tough, but then most people take it off their radar. And here's where I think it gets interesting, right? So most people are scared that this is going to squeeze. The next day we end up gapping down and we kind of have this little consolidation bar. When we get this day on 7-21, I'm thinking to myself, man, I need to still keep an eye on this. Like if this was a normal low float, I might not care as much, but again, it's not. It's the most boring stock in the market. There's way more meat on the bone than people might expect. So I'm paying attention now as more like a big picture. So on the daily chart, huge move, we gap down and don't sustain it, kind of a consolidation bar. I want to see us break prior bar lows. Much like I treat this as an intraday, imagine if this capitulated. This is that inside bar, that break of prior bar lows, that is my entry. And so really where this sets up is not so much for day trader world, but really for swing trader world, just because it's such an amazing daily pattern. And so what we have is on 724, we end up breaking that low there. And I'm going to just quickly jump to what that looks like. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay. I think I might have been a day off. Oh no, I'm right. Sorry about that. Okay, so where we break the 60s and the mid 50s, it's in here and not super clean, right? So if I do short this intraday, I'm getting stopped out. But I think for this type of play, because I'm mostly interested in the daily, I try to always keep my timeframes consistent, right? So I'm less interested in making an intraday play because this intraday chart isn't doing anything so special for me. What I really want to do is zoom out and get the swing trader hat on because it's really this daily chart that's so appealing to me, right? It never did anything either of these days on the intraday that's so clean. But when we break this pattern of prior bar lows, I want to short and give prior bar highs a stop. And I know that's kind of a wide stop, but again, I need to factor in the probability. I view the probability of this stopping out above that high very low. And call it a point of risk. This getting to 550, a point of reward, I view at least being 2 times as probable as getting stopped out. And I think in most situations, the probability of this ending, meaningfully lower over the coming days is probably like, I don't know, 3x or 4x as likely as it going higher. And so sure enough, like this trade ends up unwinding because I think what happens is a lot of people are scared of the squeeze or afraid to short. They're not really sure what to do. But once that breaks and the trend is over, it just goes smooth as silk. And once that goes and melts that next day, and closes bottom tick, that is incredible. That, like, you know, some people might take off into that, but I actually feel super encouraged by that. Moving average is still super far away. And sure enough, we get that follow-on day. As we approach 5, I mean, I think at that point, you probably got to get flat. Just because the prior bar highs now is just too far away. I don't want to risk all the way up to 6 when we've pulled back 100% of the way. So I'm definitely getting flat into 5 rather than waiting for the true stop, which probably would have got me even better price. But again, it's just not worth the risk of that bouncing back. So yes, super hard during the day, intraday, but I'd argue for like swing trader world, this was probably the easiest multi-day swing trade of the month, I would think. Okay, now we're going to jump to EOSE. And this is on 7/27. Okay. I know what you're thinking. What the hell is EOSE? Never heard of this ticker. And yeah, probably most people haven't. I do recall this just from prior times. What happens is Iceberg Research comes out with a short report. They've actually been short this name before. So now again, right, you can overthink this as much or as little as you want. So let's say you don't know Iceberg Research, but you hear they're short. If you get that headline, or if you get those reports early, you know, shorting, it's super liquid. The risk is pretty minimal. If this does, you know, if you are aware, like, oh, you know, they've been short this name before, like Iceberg Research isn't that great, then okay, maybe you don't short, whatever's right for you. But then the stock ends up just melting over like a half-hour period, right? How often do you see a short report go like this, right? And there's got to be some lower bound, of course, 0, but again, it's just not going to go bankrupt overnight. So this sets up a really interesting long opportunity, and especially if you know that this they've already been short this company before, it becomes super appealing as a long. So I think most people probably did well on the long rather than the short. Once we turn and break prior bar highs, boom, I want to get in this bar. Again, my usual stop maybe gets me out at $2. Look, I think that is an A+ trade. Lot of size on this. It doesn't take too much to do damage. Do I think like this is some home run like some of those other trades? No, I think Microsoft, Nikola, AMC Ape were all better than this, MULN. But no, this is still like a nice solid play. I don't love how these bars were starting to get tighter. I wish all of these just went in a much more waterfall-y straight line. But again, we get pretty good volume capitulation. These volume bars can be a little bit off because not all these bars are trading with the limit up, limit down halts. Nevertheless, huge move on a short report. It's already been out short on this name before. It's just too big of a move for me to not want to buy that turn. Again, I don't normally want to take the other side of Catalyst, but that's just a massive move on something that a lot of the allegations have likely been out before. One other thing I want to, actually there's two things I want to sneak into. This LYV, Live Nation, is an important one. Another huge news headline opportunity. So this was on 7/28. And now I wanted to just show you the range this thing had, right? Like that is a massive, ridiculous move. Even on a long-term chart, that comes up pretty apparent. Okay, so now we're going to jump to 7-28. Now we're gonna jump to 7-28. 2-minute bar. Okay, so what happens? Politico article comes out that the Department of Justice, I think, wants to, supposedly they're going to pursue a case against Live Nation for their monopolistic practices, may file lawsuit as soon as the fall, coming by end of the year. Live Nation has had these fears before, but certainly none super recent. And what happens is headline comes out, probably takes a little bit to get disseminated because this was breaking on Politico as opposed to some of the more major news sources. If you get that early, if you're on top of those headlines, again, what is the risk if this doesn't go anywhere, right? Like if this ends up being up, people are already aware, kind of old news, you're not going to lose anything meaningful. It is so asymmetric to have a little bit of imagination and know like, hey, like this could be big. This has moved the stock before. We do start to eventually melt. In here, it's a little bit choppy, kind of just as things get disseminated. Is it big? How big? Is it old? We then start to trend and hold prior bar highs and have a really kind of capitulatory first leg there, strong bounce. And so then what happens is we roll over. And so if you miss this short, just because you're skeptical of the headline or whatever else, at this point, the volume is real deal. We try to bounce, we can't, we start to roll. Normally, I don't love this short, but the volume is just so good going into it. I do think it's probably worth a stab there against prior bar highs, just because this could really get such momentum. And so now what happens is we make a second leg and it is just massive. The volume capitulation is huge, right? So now we've gone almost 20 points in half an hour on a headline that Department of Justice, said to bring a case in the fall. Hasn't happened yet. Some of this has been old news. So this is so similar, I would say, to the EOSE trade, right? Where it's like, look, all the people that say, oh, they've been short before on EOSE and didn't short it, well, then the long should be appealing to you. And all the people that said, oh, we've heard these allegations before about Live Nation, that's old news. Well, if the short's not appealing to you, then the long should be appealing to you. You can't have it both ways, because if you're arguing both ways and doing neither, then that's just an excuse at that point, right? Like, if this is fresh and material, then you should be shorting this. If this is old news, oh my God, so dumb that it's moving, then guess what? That long opportunity, huge capitulation, multi-leg move, 20% in half an hour. Buying that turn, super appealing. Prior bar lows does you good. I'm going to finally touch on one minor thing. I mean, this LUV was definitely another big op. And just when I thought the ops were pretty much done for the month, because I was, there were just so many of them, this PAC W was really interesting as well. This was on 7-25, and this will be the last one I bring up. Oops. Okay. 7-20, oops. 7-25. I didn't include this in my original list, but I probably should have, and I just kind of forgot. We're not perfect, folks. What happens is headline comes out, PAC W in talks, Bank of California for a merger. Obviously, PAC W has been one of those embattled banks, not quite like an FRC or Civ B, but definitely, one of the weaker banks. And so this initially shoots up on that headline, and that actually ends up being the huge opportunity, because I think the gut trader instinct on this needs to be a short, right? All those prior acquisitions were acquisitions out of weakness, acquisitions where the equity was nearly worthless. Now, keep in mind, this PAC W, it's not really like the banking crisis is largely over, right? It's not back up against the wall, accept this or Fed's going to zero you out, but it isn't first look necessarily favorable. So I do think your instinct needs to be to short this, especially once this kind of what I would call references below the unaffected price. Like if the unaffected price was 1035 and we shoot up, once that crosses back over, that is a super amazing short opportunity. I'm probably even opening to shorting that limit down. But again, I don't expect this to go to pennies. I know some guys were like, oh man, like this could have gone to $1 or $2. Like not really. Like that's just not, I just don't think that's conceivable based on, where, we're just out of the crisis at this point. It did come off based on everything that, okay, this is more like a defensive move rather than, hey, we're screwed and worthless move. So I don't want to get super stubborn. Like if we turn, you cover that, we eventually get halted. Maybe you do some pro merger arb against Bank of California shares after hours. But yeah, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to point out, just because I know that was something that a lot of people had touched. So yeah, overall, I would say the theme of this month was really having a sense of urgency to master the material presented, right? Again, with those pairs, you had the MULN to Nikola, you had the Microsoft to Apple, you had the EOSE to LYV, a lot of similar concepts. I don't think any of these were such mega home runs, but boy, was that an active month. I mean, this video is an hour long now. There were a lot of great opportunities. Yes, there were difficulties, but look, if you were not in these stocks, if you were not making money in these stocks, we need to reflect on why, and we need to say the buck stops here. If we get a good op in August, we need to so proactively adapt to that situation and crush it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your support. And I guess there's some basic disclaimers that I'm probably going to include at the end. This is all just my view. This is not trading advice. This is just simply me sharing my own views about stocks. I can't guarantee any of these prices you could have gotten. I can't guarantee you're ever going to make money in trading. There is risk. There is a zillion things. Do not sue me, because I am just sharing my views about trades that may or may not be realistic, or whatever needs to be said for all these crazy disclaimers. Thank you all. Wish you all the very best.